Welcome, everybody, to the Second Order podcast hosted by yours truly, Nate Dennett, the Step Manager. And I'm so glad that you're here. If this is your first time listening in on the show, the Second Order podcast is for those that are interested in leadership or growing their own company or starting their own company or having their own entity and what it takes to get past that first level of thinking. And to just kind of dive in deep into that, there is a quote that's from Bob Seawright that I think is always pertinent to second order thinking, which is never forget that every action has consequences and each consequence has further consequences. And really what that tries to underscore is that if you are in business and you get a customer, there are consequences to that. Not negative ones, but there are consequences to that. What are those things that you should be considering, and what are those consequences, and are you prepared for them? And that's what we talk about in this podcast consistently. So I bring on founders, I bring on owners, I bring on CTOs, I bring on CMOs, I bring on anybody that I think might offer a unique perspective to what it takes to have second order thinking, especially as it relates to growing or starting or maturing a company. So if that resonates with you, if you want to know what actually it takes to get past the first line, and if you're kind of sick of the dogma out there around just running ads and getting clients in or letting AI find the best clients for me, which I think there might be some truth there, but the majority of the time, if you have a shitty project or a shitty product, and bad customer service or bad implementation, then you're going to have a short-lived life cycle in your whatever you're trying to build. But the people that we're going to talk to are the people that have been there, that have done that, and they have had sort of that second order thinking of taking on some of the challenges that you might not be right immediately thinking of when you're starting a company. Like, what happens when I deliver, or what happens when I get a really big contract with a really big company, and am I even fit to deliver it? And a lot of people are confident in themselves and say, of course we can, of course we'll deliver it, because that's what the customer says. But can you actually, without destroying yourself? So that's the other boundary, is that's what I talk about, which is, can you be as focused on your mental health, or can you be as focused on what boundaries you set out before you started this without sacrificing everything, as it relates to just for the sake of growth or just for the sake of building up to the next level? So that's what we talk about. That's what today we are going to be talking to somebody who has, like I said, been there and done that, has his own company. Please check out his company if you're in the data space or have any data related needs in your organization. Expanso.io is a really product that we're going to talk about a little bit today with our dear guest, David Aronchick. He's going to be on in just a few minutes, and he's going to give us his perspective on not only how he's been building Expanso, but also he's got a wealth of other expertise and wealth of other backgrounds working for really, really big companies. So for those of you that are at some of those larger companies, this might ring true for you. But without further ado, let's get over to what the conversation was like with David. I found it very, very interesting, and I think that you will as well. So stick around, and we'll get into some expertise from a software or a product builder who has it in the market, and he's got customers. He's got B2B customers, most importantly. So there's a ton of insights that I'm sure you'll take away. Enjoy. Alrighty, and here we are. Welcome to the next episode of the Second Order podcast, where we talk about the things that aren't sexy related to growing your company. I'm your host, Nate Dennett, the Step Manager, and today we have a special one coming up. It's a great organic conversation with my buddy David Aronchick, and he is going to talk us through his background on how he's built his company and all the success and the trials and tribulations that we've had during that time. So, David, welcome to the podcast, and thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's wonderful to be here.
Excellent. So for the folks that don't know your name immediately or what you do, give us the elevator pitch on your the background and the company that you're leading.
Yeah. So I've done both consumer and enterprise software basically my entire career. I didn't want to start off in software at all. I wanted to be a doctor of all things, but then I got lured in by the 1.0 .com boom and ended up working at Microsoft. And then I did a varied between my own startups and then really, really big companies working at Microsoft and Google and Amazon.
Nice.
In the past about 9-10 years, I've really focused on some of the really big advancements in cloud computing.
Sure.
which has been really exciting. There's a real, kind of transition going on right now when it comes to moving from, a single big machine, or at the time anyway, started single big machine to many smaller potentially machines in the cloud that you can spin up and spin down. And that's what I led a big project at Google doing that. Then I went to do the same thing at Microsoft for the second time I was at Microsoft. And I'm doing a startup on my own around that. So yeah.
Excellent. Man, that's a crazy background. You've been at some pretty large organizations. And it's crazy
Yeah.
I think you're like the 500th person that I've spoken to that tells me that they've accidentally found software
Yeah.
as their primary vocation. So
Yeah.
that's great. Awesome. So you got lots of experience. So I want to pull on kind of that thread because a lot of the folks that listen to this are people that are from large organization backgrounds, like the Microsofts, the Googles, the larger organizations in the world, and they may, they'd be looking at like sort of the startup world as the greener pasture.
Yeah.
And I want to kind of talk through that as you're kind of thinking about how you built your company now and some of the dichotomy between the two, very large and startup side. So, what does your company do now, and who do you serve?
Yeah, so we do distributed data. So for all those folks out there thinking about using AI and machine learning and all those kind of things, it's obviously a big challenge. You're collecting data in multiple locations, maybe on-prem, factories, retail, vehicles, or it could just be you're on multiple clouds at the same time. You're on one cloud, but your data warehouse is on the second cloud. How do you bring that all together? Turns out that's the kind of thing where people are like, "Oh, how hard could it be? Don't you just upload it to the cloud?" It turns out it's not that easy. We provide a platform that makes it much, much easier to do it and do it in an AI friendly way. So a lot of times the reason you're getting bad results right now is with your AI is because you're not giving it enough information. You're not giving it the right information. Again, not your
Yep.
fault. Context is in your head, but it may not be in the AI's head. We can help you wrap that as well so that even later, even long after have the data is passed through our platform into the data warehouse, it still maintains all the important information that you need for a much later decision about using AI. So that's what we help with. We give you a platform that does that. All works on premises, all on your data, never goes through us, never uploads through us. And so lots of really big companies who have a lot of requirements around multiple locations and data security and things like that use us.
Yes. Okay. So there's a lot to unpack there. So I think, like I mentioned, we focused a lot on the second order thinking. So what happens after you get your first client or the next client, and
Yeah,
because you're a platform, I imagine that because it's data, you have a
yeah.
lot of different. It's not exactly like a turnkey experience where you just hand them the platform and then you say see you later. So talk to me a little bit about what that process looks like for you guys, and maybe some of the bumps along the road that you've learned for others, because I think, to tangent slightly, is that AI has made a lot of things accessible to a lot of different people, and
Yeah,
having products or SaaS like products enter the market now is very fast, very quick, and a lot
yeah,
of them are
yeah.
related to data. So just want to hear your thoughts on what that client onboarding looks like, and a hypothetical level, of course. You don't have to reveal any details, but and
No, of
any of the
course.
secret sauce. But that's where
I mean,
I want to get your thoughts there.
yeah, it's really interesting, and you really did hit on something. So one of the things that we really stressed is, when we were going in, as we were designing this, we were really thinking like, how do we not rip and replace anything, right? How do we make sure that this is as easy as possible to test out, to see value, even before you change a single bit of your overall flow. And it's specifically because of what you described. These people, any organization of any size, already is moving and using and relying on data today, and so it's so important that people feel, okay, well, I can test this out. I can put my toe in the water without having to do a hard cut over and things like that. Now that said, it's never zero, and anyone who promises that it is zero is lying to you.
Hmm. Yep.
But we did really try very hard, and we did a lot of design work and integration work up front to make sure it's as small as possible and is as transparent as possible, especially for unwinding or reverting back to the previous way things went. Um, Now you also touched on something that I want to unpack, which is you mentioned, and you just you really had a real insight there, which is true. As a platform, the problem is that these things typically are very generic, and
Hmm.
nobody deploys a platform. They deploy something for whatever vehicle IDS or manufacturing security on these particular HVAC systems or whatever. It's very, very vertical to their business. They don't have a
Yep.
need or interest or want in it deploying something general. They just want to solve something that deploys to them. So as a platform, we had to have, really committed motions around a variety of things. And so, we do a lot of work in energy, we do a lot of work in telco, we do a lot of work in manufacturing. And for each of those, we have very specific ways to use our platform with, not commercial add-ons, just specific, patterns that we've seen in other companies and customers in order to make them feel like, okay, these guys know what they're talking about, and they're speaking a language that is relevant to me, not just the general data problem.
Nice, very good. So you have more or less like in the consulting world, I've heard the term accelerator used a lot. Would you qualify your expertise as accelerators, or there actually are specializations of your platform for those different verticals like energy, telco, and manufacturing?
Yeah, it's much more the former. It is what you would call an accelerator, and even more than that, it's an accelerator really for partners. Because again, even though we're well funded and we've been around for years and things like that, that people don't know who we are. I'm not naive about that. But they do know who Deloitte is, or they do know who SATA is, or they do know who Red Hat Consulting Services or IBM are, right? Like, you know, and for better or worse, if they feel like we understand the motion and they feel like they can go and execute, then we can help accelerate their businesses, which is perfectly fine for us. We don't care how the customers end up using us. We just want to get there.
Nice, I love it. Very good. All right, so tell me a little bit about what it's been like as what was your first customer experience like for you guys? How did that onboarding go? And as a secondary follow up, what was the second customer experience like? How much learning did you roll into that, and unpack that a little bit for me?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting. I will say that every one of them is different in its own way. So first and second customer. So I mean, the interesting part is that it was originally, pretty you know we felt like, we're lucky enough to have come from a company that had a whole bunch of really big customers in it. All right. Sorry. Um, we came from a
Okay,
company that had a whole bunch of really big customers, right? We're former Amazonians and Microsofties and all those kind of things. So it's not like we didn't know how to work with really big customers. We did. The
sure.
problem was that when you get out there in the real world, you ultimately run into this problem where it's like, again, whatever you think you had internally to build, it just never matches with what reality is. And so for that first customer, many of our things worked great. It wasn't a situation where we had a lot of bugs. It was just like we didn't perfectly map to this other thing. And so a lot of the stuff was just smoothing the gears. Now, some of the stuff we were able to bring back and improve the product, but most of it was really just like, okay, let's make sure the product is extensible enough so that when the next customer comes around, we're able to use it. So for the first customer, it was pretty straightforward. Interestingly, the second customer was one that really did wanted our platform, but on a completely new space. So we support Windows and Linux and Mac and cloud and all that kind of stuff, and they wanted to use us on Android. Now we were lucky
Okay.
enough to have made some of the decisions up front that made that pretty straightforward to do, but we hadn't built it. So we had to make a decision like, how much is this going to cost us from an engineering time? How, what does supportability look like? all this good stuff. And we did, and ultimately we won the customer and continued to go down. And I think that that's one of the biggest things. When a lot of startups get out there, they chase customer after customer, and it ends up like spreading them very, very thin, because they end up chasing a whole bunch of different work.
Yeah.
And you have to be really thoughtful. Like, it's hard, but you could say like, hey, look, I'm not going to support it, or using us in a way that we don't we're not expected. Could you use this in this other way? And more often than not, they will meet you in the middle. If they don't, then oftentimes you've saved yourself kind of, a lot of time.
Yep.
The thing that's
Pain in the
probably,
ass.
like I said, the
Yeah.
hardest. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, no, no. You're good.
So the thing that's probably the hardest about leaving the big company that no one really internalizes is the go to market, right?
Yeah.
The level to which, the fact that your email ends in, Microsoft.com or Oracle.com or Google.com or whatever. um and even if you think you're not like that big a company, but it doesn't add that much. It really does.
Sure.
As a lifting point. And there are hundreds of jobs, or maybe even thousands of jobs, that support you in getting your products out to market that you really just don't even see. And when you get out to a startup, you have to do all of those things from scratch, all of them. And you
Yep.
go on, podcasts like this, and you talk at conferences, and you attend other people's conferences, and all those kind of things, which again, you just don't have to do if you're doing it on your own. Or
Yeah,
which you don't,
definitely.
if you're doing it at the big company.
Yeah, definitely. I think you talked about a lot of the grind related to having your own either product or having your own consulting firm or agency. And one of the things that you highlighted, which is a particularly challenging one, is related to that dynamic of you have a list of customers, and you know how your product works, and you talked a little bit about like, hey, this is what we built, but this is the kind of the feedback that we rolled into sales number two, or sale number two for the customer number two.
Mhm, mhm.
How did you? I have a series of questions around that, but how did you balance that? I guess from your own mental perspective, like how would you give advice to somebody that has the same problem? Like, I really need the second customer, but I also need to invest in the product itself to make sure that I get the second customer. What's your mental sort of framing when you approach that type of dynamic?
I don't. Again, it's so. I wish I could give general advice. It's so hard to nail it down. The thing that I did, the what I'll say is the thing that I probably did wrong. The most wrong thing I did was try and wait for the market to tell me something. And I wasn't expecting like a flood of customers to come in through a particular angle. But
Sure.
would it look like to really double, triple, quadruple down on a given hypothesis and make it happen, right? What would that look like? Maybe we have a hardware product, and maybe we have a completely dedicated sales force and things like that. I you know Those are the kind of things where I I don't know that, like, I could have done it any differently, but I wish I could have.
Sure.
Because it's that kind of thing where, like, you want to assume that it's a snowball effect. You find one customer, and then you do 10 other things just like that customer. But more
Yep.
often than not, that first customer, you look at them and you're like, wait, the reason I met this person is because I happen to have been out drinking with my buddies, and like, while we were getting a hot dog, like, I met the person in line. Like, it's just like,
Yep.
that's not repeatable. There's nothing to that.
Yep.
Like, I can't go drinking every night. Well, I don't know, maybe you can.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
like,
you could, but
the
yeah.
point is like, you're looking for that repeatability. The thing that I would kill for still to this day is like, you show me a motion where I can put $1 here and have 80% confidence that $2 comes out over there in
Sure.
whatever 90 days. I would kill for that. And
Yep.
I've tried, at least 10 different, groups to help me think it through, and so on and so forth. And I've yet to find one who's puts their money where their mouth is.
Sure. Yeah. No, I totally get that. From that go to market, that marketing. There's so much. I'll use the term slop out there, in
Oh
terms
yeah,
of
especially
the
today.
next.
It's so much
Yeah,
worse than it's
especially.
ever been.
Yeah, it's terrible. My LinkedIn is forever doomed with outreach for people
I
that want to
as
talk
a
to me
former
about
Microsoftie,
everything.
I will say I love you all, but you are sitting on the most valuable resource in possibly all of compute, all of cloud, all of anything, and you are wasting it because
Yep,
my LinkedIn inbox looks exactly like it did in 2015, and it is worthless because of
yep,
exactly what you described. Worthless. I
yep,
get 100 messages a day, and one of them is useful,
yep,
and I have nothing. I miss it. I this. I that. It's
yep,
terrible. And
yep,
please go fix it. Please, please, please. I will be
yep.
the biggest
Seconded.
champion of the world with you.
Yep, seconded. I would fully vote for that.
I do want to say
Uh,
I have absolutely no endorsement. I am not an investor. I'm not a this. I'm not a that. I do use a tool out there called Condo. It's Get Condo. I think it's the domain or something like that. And it is it's like an email. It's like Gmail, but for your LinkedIn inbox. Doesn't solve it, by the way. And again, I am not an endorser. I'm not. This is not paid. Whatever. But it's remarkably good at like letting you navigate.
nice,
So highly recommended.
nice, excellent. Appreciate that. Well, that's always good for everybody that's out there because I think everybody has the same problem that we all do. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about kind of like the earlier days. What is more relevant to you now? Like I know that you talked about putting in $1 and getting out two, which is like the kind of the Russell Brunson magic. Like that's a forever scalable system if you can put in $1 and make two out of it. So like go to market as your key focus area. But as it relates
Yeah.
to any other focus areas, maybe related to that is there a product market fit component to this? Is there,
Oh, for sure.
like,
I mean, I don't
yeah,
know. This is my fourth startup, and I've been in the game for a while. I will say, as someone who loves products, I
yep,
personally believe that the value of the product is almost, it's not zero, but it's so much smaller than you would think as far as like product market fit and things like that.
yeah,
Not
yeah,
because I don't love great products. I do. I love craft. I love thinking about it and things like that. But, imagine you have two scenarios. One where through some kind of viral mess, you are on the, billboard at Times Square. Okay.
yep, yep,
And thing two is you've crafted the most lovingly perfect product in the world, and you're sitting, on a street corner in a town in Iowa, right?
yep,
Like, what do you think is going to get you more customers, right? It's tough, man. I hate it, but like,
yep,
craft doesn't market itself. It doesn't like get new customers at the top of the funnel, and that really is all that matters a lot of times. So,
yeah,
I that said, don't underestimate the value of product market fit. Don't underestimate the value of speaking in a language your folks care about, like that actually speaks to them. If
yep,
if you can't pull a random person from that target market and speak to them, and they who have no idea what your business is, and they don't understand within 30 seconds, start over. Not
yep,
Most of the time, don't start over with your product. Most of the time, start over how you talk about it, because
yep,
it sounds like you're just talking to make yourself happy. You're doing it wrong.
yep. No, totally agree. So there is one piece of that. Well, one, I actually agree. I've seen some pretty below average products get really,
Yeah.
really far with a very robust one. They had a lot of money they threw behind it, but they had a very aggressive and robust sales organization behind it. So maybe this for all the salespeople that listen to this, that's like, hopefully your heart just picked up a little bit because there is a world for you. If you can sell anything, I think it's a
Yep.
Tommy Boy quote of selling a ketchup popsicle to a woman in white gloves.
Yep. Yep.
If you
Yep.
can do that, that's very very topical. But one thing I did want to highlight is that the nuance with your platform and your company is that it's B2B. So it
Mm,
is
mm.
very it's you're not just reaching consumers. And as you're thinking about the delivery and the client acquisition and spend and investment, from a B2B perspective, that's incredibly different ballgame than the B2C side of the equation. So what are like your, one, have you noticed that the B2B market has shifted quite a lot in the new advent of everything AI? What are your thoughts on that sort of paradigm as a platform owner?
Yeah, I think that I would argue the transition to this happened in, call it, about 2008,
Sure.
right around the time of the iPhone. Um, you had end users really engaging in the business of IT and software in a way that I think really wasn't present before.
Sure.
And it wasn't just the nerd. I'm a nerd. Going into their boss or their IT person saying, hey, I want to use this latest app. It was the CEO going and saying to the CIO, "Hey, that iPhone, that's awesome. How do we use that?" Right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
to be clear, the iPhone was not a business device. I say this like with firsthand knowledge. At the time I was working on Microsoft Exchange, and we kind of poo-pooed it, not because it wasn't a great device. It was just like this. There's no business here, right? It doesn't connect to Exchange. It doesn't connect to Lotus Notes. It doesn't, like, all the things that you want a business device to do. It doesn't do, and BlackBerry did, right? So, but it was so cool and it was so available for customers that it drove a lot of these conversations. And by the
Yeah.
way, it drove them for Microsoft and for Apple, because again, the CIOs and and CEOs also knew people at those companies and were like, hey, look, I would buy 1,000 of these things if you would let me. Okay. So let's get back to the answer to your question. I think there is absolutely a go-to-market, a lot of people use the term PLG, product-led growth motion, around this stuff. And I think there is something really powerful there. Now, some things, I don't know, industrial inventory management, right? Like, nobody's going to go in and like say, to their whatever CIO and say, hey, why aren't we using this? But if you can speak in a language that addresses their needs, they're like, oh, when's the last time you had to like manually put together an invoice to check with South Asia, right?
Hmm.
I don't know. Yeah, that was super annoying. We help with that, right? Like, that is where you're talking directly to a problem set that they have.
Yeah.
And that is, part of this. So I will say, you're spot on. It is not to consumer, but it's also not to consumer in a uh, really powerful way. Because unlike consumers, if you win and you get in, you have a much stickier like lifespan. The churn is much smaller. You know, um,
Yep.
uh, let's look at ChatGPT, right? ChatGPT was on fire. It's still doing amazingly. I'm not taking anything away from it, but in 2024, it looked like they were going to run away with the table. Then, Gemini comes out, and they don't stop ChatGPT from growing, but they start to take a whole bunch of growth. So
Yep.
ChatGPT's growth flows. And now, Anthropic is adding what, $10 billion in ARR a month, like
Yeah.
up from $5 billion the previous month. Like, it's
Yeah.
absurd, and they're doing it, right? And they're taking away from Gemini and Chat. And these are typically enterprise products or this. I mean, the switching cost for this stuff is so low.
Yeah.
Now, again, arguably, the switching cost for an enterprise is still going to be very, very low or very, very high, which is fine. But in the consumer world, the switching cost is often incredibly low.
Yep.
And a lot of the things that used to get you moats like network effects now have really become much less interesting. And so, I will say, this is a long way to get at your answer. Yes, we're selling to businesses. Yes, those businesses sell, evaluate, buy differently. Um, uh, but it looks a lot more like consumer than it did in 2005.
Yeah. Yeah. Fair enough. Yep. Fair enough. All right. David, it was a great conversation. I think you have a wealth of experience
Oh, thank you.
that many people could benefit from. So those, I'll share all of your contact information, whatever you want to share with me in the post, and make sure people have access, and getting access to your data orchestration tool, platform. That sounds fantastic, and I sincerely wish you the best of luck related to
Thank
the
you.
growth and expansion of it. From my perspective, coming from a technology product background, it does seem like it fits a really nice need for the market. So I think from a product market fit, it's there. It's just a matter of how you can pour the gas on the fire. So with that, I do wish you the best of luck, and look to have you on the podcast again in the future.
Anytime you'd like. This is fantastic. Thank you so much for the time.
So on today's episode, we obviously heard a bunch from David Aronchick, and I think that his perspective was really, really crisp and a good sort of nuanced version of, for all of those that are trying to build your own platform or AI as a service or software as a service. David, listen to some of the things that I'd like to underscore is that like really strong product market fit that we sort of have gotten addicted to with some of the books that came out in the early 2000s and the 2010s. Not necessarily the only thing that you need to have. It's not like the old adage of if you build it, they will come doesn't necessarily apply. So I think as you are exploring opportunities for you to build your products, that second order thinking is not just finding the jobs to be done and the pains and the gains and all of those things. It's really how do you find a way to build a framework and build a system to consistently get the messaging out there. And I think that's one of the last pieces that most technologists really remember. Most technologists or people that build things or even product people is how do you describe what you have built and how it solves the problems for the consumer in a meaningful way that doesn't sound like jargon. And that's a really, really challenging thing to do. And David's team at Expanso.io is they have a great number of like artifacts, and it's a developer's paradise. So they have definitely got that, and I can see why they're having success there. So just as you're considering building platforms for yourself and making really strong, the next step of what happens after you build it, how do you get the clients? Well, how do you figure out more ways of getting the clients? Highly encourage exploring some of those avenues of, okay, how can we articulate this in a way, where are the water coolers, where our ICPs are, and how can we articulate it in a way that delivers value to them and understands that it is a longer process and treats them more like that B2C side that David was alluding to. So I hope you found that this episode was useful. Find me on all of the social medias, the Second Order Podcast, or the I Am Nate the Step Manager. Feel free to reach out to me on all of the social medias as well. And I look forward to talking to you on the next episode.